The smell of funeral lilies made me nauseous. I'd been breathing it for 3 hours, standing beside my father's casket in my sensible black dress from JCPenney, the one I'd worn to every family funeral for the past decade. The hem was coming loose on one side. I'd meant to fix it. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. People kept touching my arm, murmuring condolences that sounded like elevator music. I nodded, smiled the appropriate smile, said thank you in the appropriate tone. My mother stood on my right, rigid as carved wood, accepting sympathy like it was her due. Claire stood on my left, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief she'd probably bought specifically for the occasion. I needed air. The chapel's back exit led to a small courtyard where the funeral home kept their maintenance equipment. I pushed through the heavy door, gulping oxygen that didn't taste like death and flowers. My hands were shaking. I pressed them against my thighs, willing them to stop. That's when I heard it. A soft sound, intimate. A woman's laugh, low and breathy. I turned. Behind the chapel, partially hidden by an overgrown hedge, my husband Richard had my sister Claire pressed against the brick wall. His hands were in her hair. Her hands were on his face. They were kissing like people who'd done this before. Many times, with practiced urgency. I must have made a sound because Richard's head snapped up. His eyes met mine. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, none of us moved. Then Claire smiled. Not apologetic, not embarrassed, triumphant. I ran. Not back into the chapel where 200 people were celebrating my father's life. I ran toward the parking lot, my cheap shoes slapping against asphalt, my breath coming in gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. My mother's voice stopped me. Martha Jane. She stood at the chapel's side entrance, backlit by fluorescent lights, her pearls catching the glow. Real pearls, inherited from her mother, the kind Claire had always wanted. Mom, I just saw them. I know what you saw. Her voice was flat. She walked toward me, each step measured, deliberate. When she reached me, her hand clamped around my wrist like a vice. Control yourself. Control myself. Richard and Claire were saying goodbye. Her fingernails dug into my skin. Your sister is flying back to Chicago tomorrow. Richard was emotional about your father's passing. You're overwrought. Grief makes people see things that aren't there. I stared at her. Mom, they were kissing. They were not. She leaned closer, her breath mint and spite. And if you make a scene at your father's funeral, if you embarrass this family with your hysterics, you will regret it for the rest of your life. Do you understand me? But her grip tightened until I felt bones shift. The real show hasn't started yet, Martha. Don't ruin it with your usual dramatics. The real show. What did that mean? She released my wrist and smoothed her skirt. Now come inside, smile, and say goodbye to your father like a proper daughter. We have the will reading in an hour. I followed her back into the chapel on autopilot. Richard and Claire were already inside, standing together near the guest book, looking somber and appropriate. Claire's lipstick was smudged. Richard's collar was crooked. Nobody else seemed to notice. The service continued. Pastor Williams talked about my father's 40 years at the steel mill, his service in Vietnam, his devotion to family. I sat in the front pew between my mother and my husband, feeling Claire's presence behind me like a knife between my shoulder blades. When it was over, when my father's casket had been loaded into the hearse and driven away, we gathered in the funeral home's conference room for the reading of the will. My father's attorney, Mr. Brennan, was 73 and smelled like old books. He'd handled my parents' affairs for 30 years. He opened a leather folder and cleared his throat. This is straightforward, he said. Robert James Hayes left his estate in equal shares to his wife Lydia and his daughters Martha and Claire. Equal shares. The house in Toledo, worth maybe $340,000. The savings account with $67,000. Some bonds, some stocks. Nothing remarkable. However, Mr. Brennan continued, there is one exception. The lakehouse property. My stomach lurched. The lakehouse. 40 acres on Lake Erie, including a cottage my great-grandfather had built in 1952. My father's sanctuary. The place where he'd taught me to fish. Where we'd spent summers away from the heat and noise of the city. The lakehouse. Mr. Brennan read, I leave exclusively to my daughter Martha Jane Hollowell, with the express provision that it remain inalienable during her lifetime. Claire's sharp intake of breath was audible. What does inalienable mean? My mother asked, though her tone suggested she knew perfectly well. It means Martha cannot sell, transfer, or gift the property, Mr. Brennan explained. It's hers absolutely, but it must remain hers. I felt dizzy. The lakehouse was worth at least $485,000, maybe more with waterfront values rising. My father had left it to me. Only me. Richard's hand found mine under the table. It felt wrong, contaminated. That's not fair, Claire said. Her voice was tight, controlled. Why would Daddy give Martha something worth $500,000 while we split the rest? Mr. Brennan looked uncomfortable. I don't interpret intent, Miss Hayes. I just execute the document. It's Mrs. Pierce, Claire snapped. And this is ridiculous. Martha doesn't even like the lake house. I'm the one who always wanted it. That was true. Claire had spent every summer there through college, bringing boyfriends, hosting parties. I'd stopped going after I married Richard. Too much work, I'd told my father. Too hard to get away. My mother stood. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. We'll contest this, of course. Contest it? I found my voice. Why? Because your father was 87 and on morphine, my mother said crisply. Clearly he wasn't in his right mind. He signed this 8 years ago, Mr. Brennan interjected. Long before his illness. The room went very quiet. Richard squeezed my hand. Let's discuss this at home, okay? Everyone's emotional. But when I looked at his face, I saw something that made my blood freeze. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Claire, and she was looking back at him, and some message passed between them that I couldn't read but felt in my bones. Later, while packing Richard's overnight bag for the funeral, I found it. A note, folded small, tucked in his jacket pocket. The jacket I'd hemmed for him 15 years ago, taking careful stitches by lamplight. The note said, After she signs, we're free. I love you. C. My hands started shaking again, and this time, they wouldn't stop. I didn't sleep that night. Richard came home at 2:47 a.m., smelling like hotel soap and Claire's perfume. He slipped into bed beside me, careful not to touch, and within minutes his breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep. I lay in the dark, the note burning in my mind. After she signs, we're free. Signs what? At dawn, I got up and made coffee in the kitchen of the house Richard and I had shared for 22 years. The mortgage was paid off. I'd done that, with the life insurance money from my aunt's death 5 years ago. $127,000, gone in one payment, because Richard said it made financial sense. The house was in both our names. I'd checked the deed once, years ago, to be sure. Richard appeared at 7, showered and dressed for work. He poured coffee, kissed my forehead like nothing had happened, like I hadn't seen his tongue in my sister's mouth 12 hours earlier. You okay? He asked. Yesterday was rough. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Listen, Claire called. She wants to come by this afternoon to talk about the estate stuff. Your mom, too. Is that all right? My hands tightened around my mug. Why? Because we're family, Martha. We need to discuss things rationally without lawyers complicating everything. Mr. Brennan said the will is clear. Richard's jaw tightened just slightly. The will is outdated. Your dad wrote it when he thought you'd take care of the lake house, maintain it. But you haven't been there in 8 years. It's rotting. The roof needs replacing. The dock is falling apart. It's not fair to Claire. Dad left it to me. Dad was old and sentimental. Richard set down his cup with a sharp click. Be reasonable. Sign the house over to joint ownership with Claire, or agree to sell and split the proceeds. Don't be greedy. Greedy. The word hung in the air like poison. He left for work. I heard the garage door close, his car engine fade. Then I went to his study. Richard kept files in a locked cabinet. The key was taped under his desk drawer, same place for 10 years. He thought I didn't know. I'd always known. Inside, I found folders labeled with familiar names: estate planning, life insurance, property documents. I found something else, too. A power of attorney form dated 3 weeks ago. My signature at the bottom, neat and perfect, except I'd never signed it. The document authorized Richard to make financial decisions on my behalf, including property transfers, in the event of mental incapacity. There were 2 witness signatures: Claire Hayes Pierce, Lydia Marie Hayes. My hands went numb. I photographed everything with my phone, hands shaking so badly the first 3 shots were blurred. Then I put the files back exactly as I'd found them. Claire arrived at 3, my mother at 3:15. They settled in my living room like they owned it. Claire on the sofa I'd reupholstered last spring. My mother in the wingback chair that had belonged to my grandmother. Richard came home early. He'd never done that before, not once in 22 years. "Martha," my mother began, "we need to talk about your father's wishes." His wishes were in the will. His real wishes. Claire leaned forward. The things he told me privately before he got sick. I waited. "He wanted the lakehouse to stay in the family," Claire continued. "All the family. He was worried about you being alone there, especially after Richard retires. He thought it would be better if we shared it, made decisions together. Then why did he leave it only to me?" My mother's mouth thinned. "Because you manipulated him. You always were his favorite, always crying on his shoulder about how hard your life was." The accusation hit like a slap. "I never—" "You did." Claire's voice was soft, sympathetic. "Martha, we understand. You've been under so much stress. The anxiety, the forgetfulness. Richard's told us how worried he is." My stomach dropped. "What?" Richard moved behind my chair, his hands on my shoulders. To anyone watching, it would look supportive, but his grip was just slightly too tight. "Honey, you've been struggling, missing appointments, getting confused about dates. It's nothing to be ashamed of." "I'm not confused. You forgot my birthday last month," he said gently. "You forgot our anniversary in March." That was a lie. I'd remembered both. He'd been the one who canceled dinner twice, claiming work emergencies. "The point is," my mother said, "we're concerned about you making major decisions right now. The lakehouse is complicated. Taxes, maintenance, liability. It's too much for one person, especially someone in your condition. My condition. Early onset dementia runs in families," Claire said. "Grandma Hayes had it. Started at 68, just like you. I was 68. My grandmother had died at 70, unable to recognize her own children. I don't have dementia." "Of course not." Richard's thumbs pressed into my shoulders. "But preventatively, it makes sense to have safeguards. That's why I had the power of attorney drawn up. Just in case. The power of attorney with the forged signature. I didn't sign that." Silence fell like a guillotine. "Yes, you did," Richard said slowly. 3 weeks ago, don't you remember? We were at Brennan's office. I've never been to his office." My mother stood. "This is exactly what we're talking about. Martha, you're forgetting things. Important things." "I'm not forgetting. I never signed anything." Claire exchanged a look with Richard. "Should we call Dr. Morrison?" "Who's Dr. Morrison?" "Your neurologist," Richard said. "You saw him last month. He's the one who recommended the cognitive testing." My heart was pounding. "I don't have a neurologist." "Martha," my mother's voice was cold now. "Stop this. You're embarrassing yourself." Richard walked to his study, returned with a folder. Inside were medical records, forms, appointment cards, all with my name, all documenting visits I'd never made, diagnoses I'd never received. Dr. Edward Morrison, neurologist, patient, Martha J. Hollowell, diagnosis, mild cognitive impairment, probable early Alzheimer's disease. The signature at the bottom looked exactly like mine. "This isn't real," I whispered. "It's very real." Claire's voice was gentle, pitying. "And we're here to help you. That's what family does. The lakehouse," my mother said, "needs to be protected. If you transfer it to a family trust now, with all of us as trustees, it'll be safe. No one can take advantage of you." Take advantage. As if I were the predator. "And if I refuse?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Then we'll have to pursue guardianship," Richard said quietly. "For your own protection." "Doctor, Morrison's records are very clear. You're not capable of managing your own affairs." I looked at the 3 of them. My husband of 22 years, My sister, who I'd helped raise after our father worked double shifts. My mother, who I'd bathed and fed and cared for after her stroke. They stared back at me with faces carved from stone. I need time to think, I managed. Of course, Richard smiled. Take all the time you need. We have an appointment with Judge Crawford next Tuesday to discuss the guardianship petition. That gives you 6 days. After they left, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time since my father's funeral. Not soft tears, but the kind that crack your ribs, that leave you gasping. Then I stopped crying, dried my face, and started making calls. The first was to a locksmith. The second was to a lawyer whose commercial I'd seen on late-night television. The third was to the county recorder's office. By midnight, I'd learned 3 things. 1. The power of attorney had been filed officially. The clerk remembered Richard bringing it in, remembered him saying his wife was having some trouble. 2. There was a deed transfer in process. My name, Richard's name, Claire's name, joint tenancy, filed the day after my father's funeral. 3. The lakehouse property, according to county records, had a lien against it. $340,000, filed by Richard 2 weeks before my father died. A lien I'd never authorized. A lien that meant if I didn't pay, the property could be seized. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The joint account Richard and I shared showed a balance of $1,247. Last month it had been $128,247. He'd moved the money, all of it. My hands started shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was rage, cold and clarifying. I'd spent 22 years being reasonable, being understanding, being the good wife, the good daughter, the good sister, and they'd mistaken that for weakness. In the dark of my kitchen, I smiled for the first time in days, because I knew something they didn't. My father hadn't left me the lake house because he was sentimental. He'd left it to me because he knew. And in his study at the lake house, locked in a safe only I knew existed, was a letter explaining exactly what he'd discovered about Claire before he died. The lawyer from the television commercial was named Dennis Kowalski. His office was above a pizza shop on Monroe Street, and he wore a suit that had seen better decades. But he listened without interrupting while I spread my evidence across his desk. The forged power of attorney, the fake medical records, bank statements showing the missing money, the property lien. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Mrs. Hollowell, I'm going to be honest with you. This is bad. Can you help me? I can try. But here's the problem. They've been very careful. The medical records are filed with the county health system. The power of attorney is notarized. The lien is legal, even if you didn't authorize it, because your husband is on the deed. But I never signed. Proving that will take time. Handwriting analysis, forensic document examination, depositions. We're talking months, maybe a year. And meanwhile, that guardianship hearing is in 5 days. My stomach twisted. What happens at the hearing? They'll present evidence that you're incapacitated, the medical records, testimony about your behavior. If the judge agrees, they can appoint a guardian to manage your affairs, usually a family member. Richard. Most likely. Kowalski pulled out a legal pad. The guardian would control your assets, make decisions about your living situation, medical care, everything. You'd essentially become a legal child. The room tilted. How do I stop it? You'd need your own medical evaluation, testimony from people who can vouch for your mental capacity, evidence that the records are falsified. That takes time we don't have. So I'm trapped. Not necessarily. He tapped his pen against the pad. There's one option. It's extreme, but given the timeline. What? You could leave? Right now. Go somewhere they can't find you until we have time to build a case. Ohio law requires you to be present at the hearing. No defendant, no guardianship. You want me to run away. I want you to protect yourself while we fight this properly. Stay with a friend out of state. Use cash only. Don't contact anyone in your family. Give me 2 weeks to get the documents analyzed and file counter motions. I thought about my father's letter at the lake house. Whatever he'd discovered, it was there waiting. But if I went to the lake house, they'd know. It was the first place they'd look. I need to think about it. You have until Monday. Kowalski stood. My retainer is $5,000. Can you manage that? I thought about my empty bank account. I'll figure it out. That night, Richard didn't come home. At 10:00 p.m., he sent a text. Staying at hotel. Need space to think. We'll talk tomorrow. I knew where he was, with Claire, planning the next move in whatever game they were playing. I went to the basement and found my emergency cash envelope, hidden inside a box of Christmas ornaments. $3,400. Money I'd saved from grocery budgets over the years. A secret nest egg for emergencies. This qualified. Saturday morning, I drove to the lakehouse. The route was automatic, muscle memory from childhood summers. Toledo to Lake Erie, 43 miles of flat Ohio highway. The house sat on a point of land jutting into the water. My great-grandfather had built it himself. Logs chinked with concrete, a stone fireplace big enough to stand in. The dock sagged into gray water. The roof shingles were curling. Richard was right about one thing. The place needed work, but it was mine. I let myself in with the key I'd kept on my ring for 40 years. Inside smelled like closed spaces and mouse droppings. Dust coated every surface, but the bones were good. Solid. My father's study was at the back, overlooking the water. His desk still held papers, a coffee mug with dried rings at the bottom, reading glasses. Like he'd just stepped out. The safe was built into the floor under a section of loose planking. My father had shown it to me when I was 12. Made me memorize the combination. Our secret, he'd said. Just yours and mine. I knelt and worked the dial. 14/27/52. The year of my birth. The latch clicked. Inside was a thick manila envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting. Beneath that, bundled stacks of cash. I counted quickly. $47,000. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside were documents. Photocopies of bank statements in Claire's name, wire transfers, receipts, and a letter. Martha, my father's familiar script began. If you're reading this, I'm gone and you're in trouble. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I can give you this. The letter explained everything. 3 years ago, Claire had approached my father with a proposal. She was in debt, serious debt. Her husband's business had failed. They'd lost everything, were facing bankruptcy. She needed money. My father had helped her. $125,000 from his savings. A loan, he'd thought, but Claire never paid it back. Then she'd asked for more, another $200,000. When my father refused, she'd threatened him. Said she'd tell everyone he'd molested her as a child. A lie, but a powerful one. The kind that destroys a man even if it's proven false. My father had gone to a lawyer. Documented everything, the money transfers, Claire's emails threatening him, her shopping sprees on credit cards while claiming poverty. She's sick, Martha, the letter continued. Not evil, maybe, but broken. And she's desperate. Desperate people do terrible things. The letter ended with instructions. The lakehouse is yours alone because she can't be trusted with it. She'll try to take it. Don't let her. Fight. I know you think you're not strong enough, but you are. You're my daughter. Fight. I sat on the dusty floor and read the letter 3 times. Then my phone rang. My mother. Where are you? Her voice was sharp. At the lakehouse. Silence. Then, come home immediately. We're having a family meeting. I don't think... This isn't optional, Martha. We're discussing your care. 4 o'clock. Don't be late. She hung up. I looked at the papers in my hands. The cash. The evidence. Then I made a decision. I drove back to Toledo and arrived at my mother's house at 3:55. Richard's car was in the driveway. So was Claire's rental. Inside, they were waiting in the living room. Richard, Claire, my mother, and someone I didn't recognize. A woman in her 40s, professional suit, briefcase. Martha, this is Dr. Sandra Reeves, my mother said. She's a geriatric psychiatrist. The woman stood, extended her hand. Mrs. Hollowell, thank you for coming. I didn't take her hand. What's going on? We've asked Dr. Reeves to do an informal evaluation, Richard said. Given the concerns about your cognitive state. Sit down, please. Dr. Reeves gestured to a chair positioned in the center of the room. Like an interrogation, I remained standing. I don't consent to any evaluation. Martha, don't be difficult. Claire's voice was strained. We're trying to help you. If you don't cooperate, my mother added, It will look very bad at the hearing on Tuesday. I looked at each of them in turn, saw the trap closing. If I stayed, they'd create more evidence of my incompetence. If I left, they'd say I was unstable, paranoid. Either way, I lost. I'd like to ask you some questions, Dr. Reeves began. Simple things. Can you tell me what day it is? Saturday, November 9th. And who is the current president? I answered mechanically. Date, time, address, simple arithmetic. She asked about my childhood, my marriage, my daily routine. I saw Richard taking notes. After 20 minutes, Dr. Reeves closed her notebook. Thank you, Mrs. Hollowell. That's helpful. And? My mother demanded. Dr. Reeves hesitated. I'd need to do a more thorough evaluation in a clinical setting, but based on this conversation, I don't see obvious signs of cognitive impairment. The room went silent. That's ridiculous. Claire stood. You heard her. She's paranoid, accusatory. She thinks we're conspiring against her. Are you? Dr. Reeves asked mildly. Of course not. We're trying to protect her from herself. Dr. Reeves looked at me. Mrs. Hollowell, do you feel safe in your home? The question hung in the air. No, I said quietly. I don't. Richard's face went hard. Martha, stop this. She asked if I feel safe. I don't. My husband is having an affair with my sister. Money has disappeared from our accounts. Documents have been forged with my signature. I don't feel safe at all. Dr. Reeves was writing now, quickly. She's delusional, my mother said. This is exactly what we've been talking about. She's making wild accusations. Are they wild? Dr. Reeves asked. Or are they true? We're done here. Richard stood. Thank you for your time, Dr. Reeves. We'll find someone more objective. After the psychiatrist left, the three of them turned on me like wolves. You stupid woman. My mother's voice was ice. You just made this much worse for yourself. Did I? Tuesday morning, Richard said. You'll be declared incompetent. I'll be appointed your guardian. And the first thing I'm doing is putting you in Meadowbrook, the memory care facility on the west side. The place where people went to die slowly. You can't. I can. I will. He moved closer. You should have signed when you had the chance. You should have been reasonable. Reasonable? You're stealing from me. Claire laughed, sharp and bitter. Stealing? Martha? You've had everything handed to you your entire life. Daddy's favorite, the perfect daughter. Well, guess what? He's gone now, and the rest of us are taking what we deserve. I looked at my mother. You're okay with this? She met my eyes without flinching. You were always weak, Martha. Always crying. Always needing help. Claire is strong. She knows how to survive. She deserves that property more than you ever did. The words landed like physical blows. I walked out. Behind me, Richard called. Run if you want. We'll find you. And when we do, Meadowbrook will look like a vacation. I drove back to my house in a fog. Inside, I started packing. Clothes, documents, the cash from the lakehouse, my father's letter. At midnight, I loaded my car and left. I drove east on I-90 until the Ohio-Pennsylvania border, then stopped at a rest area and slept in my car. When dawn came, I kept driving. Pittsburgh, Harrisburg. By noon Sunday, I was in a motel outside Philadelphia, paying cash, using my maiden name. The room smelled like bleach and old cigarettes. I sat on the bed and called Dennis Kowalski. Where are you? He asked immediately. Somewhere safe. Did you mean what you said about buying time? Yes, but Martha, if you're planning to run, I'm not running. I'm regrouping. I spread my father's documents on the polyester bedspread. I have evidence. Real evidence. Can you use it? What kind of evidence? I told him about the letter, the bank statements, Claire's threats against our father. He listened in silence. This changes things, he said finally. This changes everything. Can you scan and email those documents? I don't have a scanner. Find a FedEx office. Scan everything. Send it to my secure email. I'll file an emergency motion tomorrow morning. What kind of motion? To postpone the guardianship hearing and investigate fraud. If I can prove your sister blackmailed your father, it establishes a pattern of manipulation. We can argue the medical records are part of the same scheme. Hope flickered in my chest. Will it work? I don't know, but it's better than nothing. I found a FedEx on Roosevelt Boulevard and spent an hour scanning documents. The clerk, a young man with elaborate tattoos, asked if I was okay. I must have looked as desperate as I felt. "Rough weekend," I managed. "Tell me about it." He handed me the receipt. "Whatever you're dealing with, I hope it gets better." That small kindness nearly broke me. Back at the motel, I tried to think through my next moves. I had $50,400 in cash, my father's evidence, and maybe 72 hours before Richard reported me missing. After that, they'd freeze my credit cards, call the police, paint me as a confused old woman wandering lost. I needed allies. The problem was, I didn't have many. I'd spent 22 years in Richard's social circle, his church, his world. The friends I'd had before marriage had drifted away, busy with their own lives. My father was dead. My mother and sister were enemies. There was one person, maybe, Sarah Brennan, Mr. Brennan's secretary. She'd worked for him for 35 years, had known my father since I was a child. At the funeral, she'd squeezed my hand and whispered, "Your daddy loved you best. Don't let anyone tell you different." I called the law office Monday morning. Mr. Brennan answered. "Martha, where are you?" Richard called. "He's worried sick. I need to speak to Sarah." "She's not here, He paused. "Why do you need Sarah?" "Please, it's important." Another pause. Then, "Hold on." Muffled conversation. Then a woman's voice, cautious. "Martha?" "Sarah, I need help." "Where are you, honey?" Something in her tone made me trust her. I told her everything. The forged documents, the fake medical records, my father's letter. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I knew something was wrong," she said finally. "Your father came to see Mr. Brennan 6 months before he died. Insisted I leave the room, which he'd never done before. They were in there for 2 hours. When your father left, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. Did Mr. Brennan tell you what they discussed? No. Attorney-client privilege, even after death. But Martha, I saw the documents your father brought. Not the contents, just the folders. One was labeled Claire, fraud evidence. Another was Martha, protection. My heart was pounding. "Sarah, I need to know what was in those files. I can't access them. Mr. Brennan keeps certain files locked in his private safe. Only he has the combination. Could you ask him?" "Honey, Mr. Brennan is 73 and very proper. He won't break privilege, not even for this. But," she hesitated, "I remember something. When your father left that day, he stopped at my desk. He was crying. He said, 'Sarah, if anything happens to me, make sure Martha knows about the cottage papers.'" "Cottage papers? You mean the lake house?" "I don't know, but he was specific. The cottage papers in the blue folder." I remember because it seemed important to him. Where would those papers be? If they're not in Mr. Brennan's safe, they'd be wherever your father kept them. His house, maybe. Or the lake house itself. I'd searched the lake house. The safe had contained the letter and the cash, but no blue folder, unless I'd missed something. "Sarah, can you do me a favor? If Richard or Claire calls asking about estate documents, could you delay them? Just for a few days? I can try. Martha, be careful. Whatever your father found out, it was bad enough to make him cry. These people are dangerous." I drove back to Ohio that night, arriving in Toledo at 3 a.m. The lake house was dark, no cars in the driveway. I let myself in quietly, using only my phone flashlight. The safe was empty now. I'd taken everything, but I looked again at the floor around it, the boards my father had loosened to install the safe. One board at the back corner was shorter than the others. Not obviously, but enough that there was a gap. I pried it up with a screwdriver from the kitchen. Underneath was a space about 6 inches deep, and in that space was a blue folder. Inside were photocopies of documents. A marriage certificate for Claire Hayes and Robert Pierce, dated 1992. Divorce papers, dated 1994. Another marriage certificate, Claire Hayes and Robert Pierce, dated 2001. She'd married the same man twice. There were also bank statements showing Claire had withdrawn $340,000 from a joint account with her husband 3 weeks before their second marriage ended. The account was emptied the day before she filed for divorce. And there was one more document, A police report from Chicago, dated 2003. Claire Pierce, arrested for fraud. Charges dropped due to lack of evidence. My father had been investigating her, building a case. The final paper in the folder was a handwritten note on my father's stationery. Martha, Claire has done this before. The lakehouse has a separate trust, established 1985. You are the sole beneficiary. Original trust documents are with Feldman and Associates, Cleveland. She cannot touch it, no matter what she claims. The deed Richard filed is worthless. The property was never in my probate estate. I made sure. Dad, I sat back on my heels, reading the note 3 times. The lakehouse wasn't part of my father's estate at all. It had been in a trust for 39 years. The deed Richard filed, the lien he placed, none of it mattered. Because legally, the property had been mine since 1985. Claire and Richard had been fighting over something they never had any claim to. I called Kowalski at 6:00 a.m., not caring that I was waking him. I found it, I said. The proof. All of it. What did you find? I told him about the trust, the documents, Claire's history of fraud. He was silent for a long time. Martha, this is extraordinary. If the trust is legitimate, the guardianship proceeding is pointless. They have no standing to control property that was never yours to lose capacity over. It was always in trust. Can you verify the trust? I'll call Feldman and Associates first thing. If they have the original documents, we can file an emergency motion to dismiss. We might even have grounds for criminal charges. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft. How long? Give me until noon. Stay where you are. Don't contact anyone. I waited in the lake house as the sun came up over the water. The windows faced east, catching the first light. My father had loved this view. He'd sit in his chair with coffee, watching the sky change colors. I understood now why he'd protected this place so fiercely. It wasn't about the money, though the property was worth $500,000. It wasn't about sentiment, though he'd loved it. It was about giving me something no one could take away. My phone rang at 11:47. Kowalski. I spoke to Feldman and Associates. The trust exists. Original documents signed in 1985, with you as beneficiary. Your father was the trustee until his death, at which point you became both beneficiary and trustee. The property is entirely yours, outside any estate or marital assets. I closed my eyes. So, Richard's deed is invalid. The lien is invalid. The power of attorney is irrelevant because it can't give him control of trust assets. Martha, you've won. What about the guardianship hearing tomorrow? I'm filing to dismiss within the hour, but there's more. I contacted the county prosecutor about the forged documents. They're interested. Very interested. And when I mentioned your sister's history, he paused. They're opening an investigation. Into Claire? Into all of them. Claire, Richard, possibly your mother, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, attempted theft. These are serious charges. My hands were shaking. What do I do now? You come home. You walk into that hearing tomorrow with your head high, and you watch them realize they've lost. Dennis, I'm scared. I know, but you're not alone anymore. We have the evidence, we have the law, and we have the truth. That's more than they have. After I hung up, I sat in my father's chair and watched the water. The morning was clear, the lake calm. Somewhere in Cleveland, lawyers were filing motions. In Toledo, Richard and Claire were probably planning what they'd say at the hearing, how they'd paint me as incompetent. They had no idea what was coming. I thought about my father's letter. Fight, he'd written. You're my daughter. Fight. I was fighting now, and I was winning. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. Tuesday in Judge Crawford's chambers. I arrived at 8:45 with Dennis Kowalski, carrying a briefcase full of documents that would destroy 3 lives. I'd dressed carefully. Navy suit, low heels, minimal makeup. I looked exactly like what I was, a competent 68-year-old woman who knew her own mind. Richard was already there, sitting with Claire and my mother. They had their own lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit. When Richard saw me, his expression cycled through surprise, anger, and something that might have been fear. Martha. He stood, Where have you been? I've been worried sick. Have you? My voice was flat. Claire's eyes narrowed. You look well for someone supposedly having a mental health crisis. I'm fine, I've always been fine. The sharp-faced lawyer stepped forward. Mrs. Hollowell, I'm Amanda Chen, representing your husband in this matter. We're glad you're safe. This hearing is simply to ensure you have the support you need. I don't need support. I need you to stop trying to steal my property. Judge Crawford's clerk appeared. The judge will see you now. Crawford's chambers were wood-paneled and lined with law books. The judge himself was 60, with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain. He looked at the assembled group with obvious weariness. This is a guardianship petition, he began. Mr. Hollowell is seeking to be appointed guardian of his wife due to concerns about her mental capacity. Mrs. Hollowell is represented by Mr. Kowalski. Let's begin. Amanda Chen stood. Your Honor, we have substantial documentation showing Mrs. Hollowell's declining cognitive function. Medical records from Dr. Edward Morrison, a neurologist who's been treating her for 6 months. Testimony from family members about erratic behavior, memory loss, and paranoid delusions. I'd like to present those medical records, Kowalski said calmly. Chen handed over a thick folder. Kowalski glanced through it, then looked up. Your Honor, I have here a sworn affidavit from the Ohio Medical Board. Dr. Edward Morrison exists, but he has never treated Martha Hollowell. In fact, he's never met her. These records are forgeries. The room went silent. Chen's face paled. That's not possible. It's very possible. Kowalski placed the affidavit on the judge's desk. Dr. Morrison was contacted by investigators yesterday. He confirmed he did not create these records and did not authorize anyone to use his name or medical license number. The Ohio Medical Board is investigating this as medical fraud. Richard half stood. This is ridiculous. Those records are legitimate. Are they? Kowalski pulled out another document. Because the signature on these records doesn't match Dr. Morrison's actual signature. We had a handwriting expert compare them. Would you like to see the analysis? Judge Crawford took the document, studied it. His expression hardened. Ms. Chen, did you verify these records before filing? My client provided them. I had no reason to doubt. Your client lied to you. The judge's voice was sharp. These are falsified medical records submitted to a court. This is a serious matter. Your Honor, Kowalski continued, there's more. Mrs. Hollowell's signature has been forged on multiple documents. A power of attorney, a deed transfer, all filed without her knowledge or consent. He laid them out one by one, each document, each forgery, each lie exposed in the harsh light of the judge's chambers. Claire's face was white. My mother sat frozen, her hands gripping her purse. Richard stood abruptly. This is a setup. My wife is mentally ill, and she's convinced some lawyer to help her with this fantasy. Mr. Hollowell, sit down, Judge Crawford ordered. No, I won't sit here and be accused of fraud, Kowalski supplied. Forgery? Attempted theft? Because that's what we're discussing. Richard turned on me, and for a moment I saw something dangerous in his eyes. Martha, tell them. Tell them you signed those documents. You were just confused about when. I never signed them. You did. You're forgetting again. You're sick. I'm not sick. My voice was steady. I'm not confused, and I didn't sign anything. He moved toward me, and Kowalski stepped between us. Mr. Hollowell, I suggest you return to your seat. Get out of my way. Richard's voice was low, threatening. Dad, stop. I blinked. A young man had appeared in the doorway, mid-30s, wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase. It took me a moment to place him. Ethan, my brother's son. The nephew I hadn't seen in 5 years, since he'd moved to Cleveland for his law practice. Ethan? Richard's anger faltered. What are you doing here? I'm here because Mr. Kowalski called me yesterday. Ethan walked into the room, his presence somehow calming the chaos. He told me what was happening, what you were trying to do. This is family business, Claire snapped. It doesn't concern you. My grandmother's welfare concerns me. Ethan placed his briefcase on the table, especially when my own father's siblings are trying to rob her. My mother found her voice. Ethan, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Grandma Lydia. I understand that Aunt Claire has a criminal record for fraud. I understand that Uncle Richard has been forging documents. And I understand that my great-uncle Robert knew all of this before he died. He pulled documents from his briefcase. I work for Feldman and Associates in Cleveland. We've been trustees of the Hayes Family Trust since 1985. When Mr. Kowalski called yesterday, asking about the lakehouse property, I recognized the name. I pulled the files. Judge Crawford leaned forward. There's a trust? Yes, Your Honor. Established by Robert Hayes in 1985, with his daughter Martha as sole beneficiary. The lakehouse property was placed in trust at that time. It was never part of Mr. Hayes's probate estate, which means any deed transfers or liens filed by Mr. Hollowell are legally invalid. Richard's face went from pale to red. That's not possible. I had the deed. I filed it with the county. You filed a fraudulent document. Ethan's voice was professional, clinical. The property was already owned by the trust. You had no legal right to file anything. Claire suddenly stood. This is insane. Daddy would never cut me out like that. He didn't cut you out of his estate, Ethan replied. He left you equal shares of everything else. But the lake house was protected. He made sure of it. Why? Claire's voice broke. Why would he do that? Because he knew. I spoke quietly and everyone turned to look at me. He knew about Chicago, about the fraud arrest, about the money you stole from your husband, about the blackmail. Claire's expression crumbled. You did. I pulled out my father's letter, unfolded it. He documented everything. Every threat, every lie, every dollar. He knew exactly who you were. Let me see that. Judge Crawford held out his hand. I gave him the letter. He read it slowly, his face growing grimmer with each line. Your Honor, Amanda Chen tried again. My client was not aware. Your client forged medical records and filed fraudulent documents with this court. I don't care what he was or wasn't aware of. Crawford looked at Richard. Mr. Hollowell, I'm denying this petition. I'm also referring this matter to the county prosecutor for criminal investigation. Richard lunged, not at the judge, but at me. His hands reached for my throat before Kowalski and Ethan both grabbed him. You ruined everything, Richard snarled. You stupid, worthless... Court security burst in, pulled him back. He was still shouting as they dragged him into the hallway. Claire turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Martha, please. I'm sorry. I was desperate. The debt. The pressure. I didn't know what else to do. You could have asked for help. Real help. I did ask. Daddy said no. Because you'd already taken $125,000 and never paid it back. Because you threatened him. She shook her head. That's not how it was. He misunderstood. I was trying to protect myself. By destroying me? It wasn't supposed to be like this. Richard said we'd just share the lake house, split the money. Nobody would get hurt. I would have been locked in a memory care facility. How is that not hurt? Claire had no answer. My mother finally spoke, her voice small. I thought you'd be taken care of. Richard promised you'd be comfortable. Comfortable? I stared at her. You were going to let them put me away. Let them steal everything Dad left me. Your own daughter. Claire needed it more. She's always needed more. My mother's hands were shaking. You were always so strong, Martha. I thought you'd be fine. The word landed like a slap. Strong. She'd mistaken survival for strength. Silence for acceptance. Get out, I said quietly. Martha, get out. All of you. I never want to see any of you again. Claire and my mother left. Claire still crying. My mother rigid with shock. Amanda Chen followed, already on her phone, probably calling her malpractice insurance. Only Ethan remained. Aunt Martha, he said gently, I'm sorry for all of it. For not staying in touch, for not being there when you needed family. You're here now. I am. And I'll help you through whatever comes next. The criminal proceedings, securing the property, all of it. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. Judge Crawford cleared his throat. Mrs. Hollowell, for what it's worth, your father was a wise man. He protected you well. He did, I whispered. He really did. The criminal charges were filed within a week. Richard faced 5 counts: fraud, forgery, filing false documents, attempted theft, and conspiracy. Claire faced 4 counts: my mother too. The prosecutor, a young woman named Jessica Vance, called me personally to explain. Mrs. Hollowell, I want you to understand what we're dealing with. This wasn't opportunistic crime. This was systematic, planned, and executed over months. They created an entire false medical history, forged multiple legal documents, and attempted to steal property worth over $500,000. What happens now? Trial, most likely. Unless they accept a plea deal. Given the evidence, I'd say plea is more probable. She was right. Richard's lawyer contacted Kowalski 3 days later. Richard wanted to negotiate. We met at Kowalski's office. Richard sat across from me, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face haggard. His lawyer, a tired-looking man named Patterson, did most of the talking. My client is willing to plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for a recommended sentence. What's he offering? Kowalski asked. Guilty plea to fraud and forgery. 3 years in prison, eligible for parole after 18 months. He'll also agree to pay restitution. How much restitution? Patterson shifted uncomfortably. All marital assets will be signed over to Mrs. Hollowell. The house, the retirement accounts, everything. Approximately $340,000 total. I looked at Richard. He wouldn't meet my eyes. What about Claire? I asked. She's negotiating separately, Vance said. She'd joined us for the meeting. She's looking at 2 years, eligible for parole after 12 months, plus restitution of the $125,000 she originally borrowed from your father and my mother. Vance's expression softened. Mrs. Hayes is 72 and in poor health. The prosecutor is recommending probation and community service. She'll also be required to undergo psychological evaluation. Richard finally spoke, his voice rough. Martha, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I am. Are you? I studied his face. Are you sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught? He flinched. Both, maybe. I don't know anymore. Claire, she got in my head. Made me think we deserved it. That you were keeping something from us that should have been shared. I didn't even know about the trust until last week. I know that now. He rubbed his face. I threw away 22 years for money I never even got. I'm an idiot. You're a criminal. Yeah, that too. He looked at me directly for the first time. For what it's worth, I did love you. Once, before everything got complicated. Before you started sleeping with my sister. That was stupid. It meant nothing. It meant everything. I stood. Take the deal, Richard. Go to prison. Pay what you owe. Maybe someday you'll actually understand what you destroyed. He signed the papers that afternoon. Claire's negotiation was harder. She refused to plead guilty at first, insisted she'd been manipulated by Richard, that she was a victim too. But when Kowalski presented the evidence of her prior fraud arrest, her history of financial schemes, she crumbled. She accepted 2 years in prison and full restitution. My mother never apologized. Not once. When I saw her at Claire's sentencing, she looked at me with cold eyes and said, You've destroyed this family. No, I replied. You did that when you chose Claire over me. When you let them forge documents and plan to lock me away. You did this. She turned and walked away. I never saw her again. 6 months later, I stood on the dock at the lakehouse watching spring arrive. The water was still cold, but the ice had melted. Trees showed the first hint of green. I'd used Richard's restitution money to renovate. New roof, new dock, new windows. The cottage looked like it had in my childhood, solid and welcoming. I'd hired a property manager, a woman named Carol who lived nearby and loved the place as much as I did. I'm thinking of opening it as a retreat center, I told Ethan. He'd driven up from Cleveland for the weekend, bringing his wife and 2 kids. A place for women going through difficult transitions, divorce, loss, starting over. That's a beautiful idea. Ethan's daughter, 7-year-old Sophie, was exploring the shoreline with her brother. Grandpa Robert would have loved it. He would have. I watched the children play. He wanted this place to mean something, not just be a pile of money to fight over. You made the right choices, Aunt Martha, even when they were hard. The hardest choice had been cutting off contact with my mother. She'd had a stroke in March, been hospitalized for 2 weeks. Claire, out on bail pending her prison surrender date, had called begging me to visit. I'd said no. "She's dying," Claire had pleaded. "She wants to see you." She should have thought of that before she tried to have me declared incompetent. "Martha, please. She's our mother. She stopped being my mother when she chose you over me. When she held my wrist at Dad's funeral and told me to be quiet about your affair with my husband. When she sat in that lawyer's office and let you steal from me. She made her choice." Claire had hung up crying. My mother died 3 weeks later. I didn't attend the funeral. Instead, I planted a garden at the lakehouse, something my father had always wanted to do but never had time for. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs, things that would grow and feed people. Life, not death. Richard went to prison in July. I received a letter from him 2 months in. He wrote about the monotony of incarceration, the regret that ate at him, the therapy sessions where he tried to understand how he'd become the kind of man who would betray his wife. I read it once, then burned it in the fireplace. Claire began her sentence in August. She wrote too, long rambling letters full of excuses and self-pity. I returned them unopened. Ethan thought I should forgive them eventually. "For your own peace," he said. But I felt peaceful already. More peaceful than I'd been in 22 years. The divorce was finalized in September. I took back my maiden name, Martha Jane Hayes. It felt right, like coming home. I sold the house in Toledo for $340,000. Exactly what Richard had tried to claim from the lake property. The symmetry pleased me. I kept $60,000 for expenses and donated the rest to a women's legal aid fund. The lake house became my full-time residence. I woke each morning to the sound of water, had coffee on the porch, spent afternoons reading or working in the garden. Carol and I developed the retreat center plan. We'd offer it free to women escaping domestic violence or elder abuse. "A safe place," Carol said, "where nobody can take anything from them." Exactly. In November, 1 year after my father's funeral, I hosted the first retreat. 6 women, ages 52 to 74, all of them in transition, all of them scared. I told them my story, not to frighten them, but to show them what was possible. That you could be betrayed by everyone you trusted and still survive, still build something beautiful. One woman, Linda, had been married 40 years when her husband tried to force her into a nursing home to steal her inheritance. She'd escaped with nothing but a suitcase. "How did you stop being angry?" she asked me. I didn't stop being angry. I used it. I let it fuel me until I was safe, until I had what I needed. Then I let it go because I didn't need it anymore. And your family? They're not my family anymore. Family doesn't try to destroy you. These women here, Carol, my nephew Ethan, my lawyer Dennis, they're my family now. The people who stood by me. Do you ever regret it? Fighting back? I thought about that. About the nights I'd slept in my car, the fear, the isolation. About watching Richard being led away in handcuffs, Claire sobbing at her sentencing, my mother's cold eyes. "No," I said, "not for a second." On Thanksgiving, I cooked dinner for 12. Ethan and his family, Carol and her sister, Dennis Kowalski and his wife, Sarah Brennan. We crowded around the table my great-grandfather had built, eating turkey and stuffing and pie. My phone rang once during dinner. Claire's number. I silenced it without answering. "You okay?" Ethan asked quietly. "I'm perfect." And I was. Not because everything had worked out perfectly. Not because justice had been served completely. Richard would be out in 18 months. Claire in 12. They'd rebuild their lives somehow. But I'd rebuilt mine first. On my terms, with my father's protection and my own strength. The lake house was mine, completely and absolutely. Worth $510,000 now, according to the latest appraisal. I'd never sell it. Instead, I'd written a will leaving it in trust for Ethan's children, with instructions that it always remain a place of refuge. Some things were worth more than money: safety, dignity, the knowledge that you fought for yourself and won. After dinner, I stood on the dock alone, watching the sun set over water that was mine, on property that was mine, in a life that was finally, completely mine. My mother had said I destroyed the family. She was wrong. I'd destroyed the lies, the manipulation, the cruelty disguised as love. And in their place, I'd built something real. Behind me, through the cottage windows, I could hear laughter. Ethan's kids, Carol's stories, Dennis arguing good-naturedly about football. This was family. This was home, and no one could ever take it away from me again.